Hello, credit union executives. Welcome to See You on the Show, where we give you up-to-date information on how you can reduce risk, keep key talent, and take a strategic approach to your personal financial wellness. Hosted by me, Doug English, a certified financial planner and former credit union insider with ACT Advisors. My guest on today's podcast is Deedee Myers. Deedee is the founder and CEO of Deedee Myers. She is known as the thought and practice leader in transformative change and organizational evolution for people and organizations. In this episode, we discuss strategies for becoming or developing a CEO ready now executive, including cross-functional leadership, resume tips, and be sure to listen to the end where Deedee shares when and how to work with your board when developing internal successors. Welcome to the show, Deedee. We're delighted to have you with us today to talk about how to get ready for the CEO role. But before we get into that, tell me, how did you get started working with the credit union movement?
Oh, gosh, I have to say thanks to Wade Barnett. He's an investment person a long time ago. I met him maybe 35 years ago when I worked in asset liability management. And that's how I got started in this field. And then he said, hey, you got to move away from banks and include credit unions in your client work. So I worked at Sendero Corporation, headed up their marketing, education, and client training for asset liability management, but wildly successful organization. So we expanded and brought in credit unions in. So in our business here, Doug, even in the search part of it, we were huge in banks for a long, long time. We just kept getting pulled in, drawn into credit unions. So now it's like a huge part of our offer. It's like from 5 a.m. till 8 p.m. It's just what we do, credit unions. So we're loving it.
There's a bunch of wonderful people in the credit union movement, and some of them need to get ready for the CEO role. Lots of folks are reaching that age, and the NCUA has a new proposed regulation for board-required succession planning. So talk to us a little bit about what you're seeing going on in that area of the credit union movement.
Yeah, well, first of all, I hope whatever comes out of NCUA is actually embodied and not just as a checklist thing that we have to do in credit unions, but it's actually integrated throughout the organization. And there's that spirit of like, let's develop people, let's keep looking to the future. What we're suggesting for our clients is to have a recruitment strategy that when you hire somebody, actually project their future potential value to the company. So if they come in as a branch manager or area regional manager, could they later on be your chief experience officer? Later on, could they be your CEO? Instead of just bringing them in as a body for that role, like what value could they have? So that's one thing. So I'm hoping that NCUA proposed ruling has that kind of impact and value in organizations. Second, Doug, is there's a lot of CEO retirements going on. It picked up quite a bit last year. We doubled in revenue on our CEO searches. So we have our track shoes on. We're doing a lot of good work there. What we're hoping from the candidate or internal candidate perspective is that more of the people who think they want to be CEOs start to look at how have they actually created their own journey map to be a CEO. So one thing that happens is we run a CEO search, it goes out to market, and we get resumes. And we look at the resumes, and you see, it's widely known. Recruiters take 3 to 6 seconds to look at a resume and then decide, do I keep looking or does it go into the no pile? So that's a start there.
Wow, large font.
Yeah, absolutely. I was watching a YouTube video the other day, and she said she does 6 seconds. I go, yeah, I get it. I usually say 3, but 6. So it's like, what is on the top of that resume that we need to see where we're enticed and we lean in and we keep going?
Let's go into that. So tell me what should be. What do you want to see? What is the thing that causes you to keep going? And what's the thing that causes the hard stop in that resume?
Yeah, so I admit I'm a bit of a weird duck in this kind of domain because I like to look at what's the strategic context that this person has about their life, about their career. I like to look and see, where does the candidate locate themselves in the career? How do they identify themselves? So at the top of the resume, what I'm looking for is there a statement like, I'm a CEO ready now executive. I've impacted and added value to organizations in these ways. So I'm looking for that pull in. If that's not there, I'll go right to their position. A lot of resumes, Doug, people just put their position at the top of the resume, then they regurgitate their position description. I oversaw accounting, I oversaw finance, I did this, I did that. So I'm going, okay, I keep looking and looking. I go, what's the value added that they had? If they did oversee the investment portfolio or they oversaw the retail operation, how did that add value to the membership? How did that add strategic value? How did that support their vision? So I'm looking for that vision, strategy, value, impact kind of language on a resume.
So strategic thinking, right, in the way you put the language together, showing that you're already mentally thinking like a CEO and not just thinking like a role player, a critical role, not that it's a minor role, but that you're thinking strategically about the way you even evaluate your own history.
Yeah, language is important. So if we see on a resume responsible for, oversaw, to me, that's very operational versus if I see initiated, changed, led, inspired, added, contributed, boom, 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 just like that.
All right, so we're going to have these strategic thinking words in the resume. And what actions should the potential CEO be taking in their day-to-day tasks? Like, how do they get ready? We did an interview with a CEO early on in this podcast, a guy named Steve Harkins, who did an interesting exercise with his senior VP level. He had them practice essentially being CEO. He had them run board meetings. He had them run some volunteer events. He sort of gave them problems to solve and looked for the strategic execution of those problems.
I love that. So, first of all, one thing we want to look at is how has the candidate developed themselves to be a cross-functional leader? So, if they've had a responsibility for a single functional domain, they may not be as ready, Doug, to lead across the organization. So, one thing that they can do is actually be on cross-functional task forces, be on cross-functional committees. Ask the CEO to take on another area of responsibility, switch roles with a peer for 6 months, for a year. That's really exciting. But look for coordination, collaboration with other peers. How did they make success with other peers? That's a great way to look at it. But you have to be able to ask your CEO, hey, I want to be a CEO. Can you help me? What other areas can I bring on? Carla Numerico is awesome at that, where she will take her executives and give them new responsibilities or have them flip roles just to develop that kind of talent in the organization.
There's some issues there might be there, right? If you have a younger CEO, they could feel a bit threatened by some of those activities. Do you see that sort of a situation occur?
I mean, are you saying a younger CEO developing people and doing that cross? Well, CEOs are there to lead the organization, and part of leading has to be people development. If they're feel threatened about that, then I think they're in the wrong job. They want to keep inspiring and developing people because you know what? They may not be there tomorrow. Stuff happens, and it's their job, their legacy to make sure that there's sustainable leadership.
The cross-functional training and leadership within the organization, when we understand now, outside of the organization, we've had other interviews on this podcast talking about if you run a $500 million credit union and you want to run a $1 billion credit union, what should you be doing? And one of the key takeaways was to do what the $1 billion credit union CEOs are doing. Be where they are, be on the committees, be in the corporate activities that they're doing at that level. So if you want to be a CEO, what should you be doing in your current role outside the organization?
Love that. So I talked earlier about how I look at the top of the resume. Then after I'm engaged in the top of the resume, I flip to the bottom and I go, what is the community impact and value this person's bringing, right? Are they involved in their local town, region, in a national way? What are they doing outside the credit union? Because boards do want people who are involved and who do help with the cause in the industry. So I look at that. The other thing I look at is ongoing learning, not necessarily the degrees. I think education is really important and it helps us with our critical and strategic thinking and problem solving. I look like, what have they done? If they got their bachelor's degree 2 decades ago and they haven't done anything since that, that tells one story. But if they've gone to maybe the Q CEO Institute or the CUNA management schools or some of the banking schools or all those great things out there, then I go, okay, they're a continual learner. I look and see those two things there as well. And the idea if I'm a $500 million CEO and I want to be CEO of a $2 billion, $3 billion credit union, I'm hanging out with those people. I'm in those CEO roundtables. I'm actually signing up to lead them. There's a lot of those things virtually now, Doug, that you can get involved with a lot of roundtables across the country and discussion formats. I'm posting, I'm writing articles, getting interviews like this, I'm sharing knowledge. So even in our organization development work, we're looking at organizations that might be $1 billion or $2 billion or $3 billion now, where we're projecting out what do they need to look like in terms of their structure and leadership and competencies and communication and leadership development when they get to be 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 billion. So they set the target at 10 billion, then they work back to what do I need to do now? And that includes developing people in a big way.
Yeah, in an ongoing way. And with the challenge for retaining talent in this environment, I would think that clear path forward would be something that would serve all parties, right? If you're being groomed to be the CEO, I think that would tend to enhance retention. Can you talk to us a little bit about activities with the board? If the potential future CEO, what sort of activities should they have with the board?
Oh, that's a good question. There's two domains there, Doug. There's the kind of CEO who has the executive in the room only when the executive needs to present something. So they come in, do a 10, 15, 30-minute presentation, Q&A, they're out the door. That scenario, they don't have the benefit, Doug, of what was the after conversation? What kind of questions came up? That sort of thing. Then there's the second domain is where the CEO says, no, I really want to develop my people and I want the board to know that I've got an excellent team and that I don't have all the answers. So I have my team in the boardroom all the time and interacting. Of course, there's probably some guidelines there, but if we are a kind of organization where we believe in internal development, then we do need to have our executives in the boardroom adding value, listening to the kind of dialogue that the board has and being able to think ahead. So if I'm that kind of CEO, I have people coming in, my people are ready to respond to questions and be more of an impact on the board thinking than if I just bring them in and out for 20 minutes and they're not involved in the after conversation. Of course, strategic planning events are powerful. Please don't sit with your buddies at strategic planning. Please integrate and sit at tables with board members and mix that up. When we do facilitation, in the middle of the day, we have people change tables. So if I'm sitting with you all day, Doug, or all morning, then I'm going to switch up and I'm going to go sit with maybe Christina or Mary or Bob. So we want to mix it up so people get to know each other. Those are 3 ways of doing it.
In my discussion with Peter, we talked about how to keep your board focused on strategic thinking. One of the many takeaways I had from our discussion was your job as the CEO is to not put tactical content in front of your board, because if you do, then they're going to dig into that content and think tactically. You need to put strategic content in front of your board and look at those longer term, more strategic activities. Does that inform anything in regard to succession planning as far as how to have that discussion with your board? CEO reached out to me in advance of this podcast and said he had some frustrations in the movement, not at his credit union, but in the movement, seeing some boards sort of go off in a wild, different direction when the CEO had prepared an internal candidate for many years at a well-established internal candidate. But then when the CEO actually announced, the board sort of had these side candidates or just went outside immediately. His concern was how to prevent that and ensure that continuity.
That's sad when that happens. And oftentimes it goes back to, I don't know if Peter shared with you, but we had this work on 6 types of boards. So that might be another session here. But one of them is independent, where the board does their thing, the CEO does their thing, but they're not cross-pollinating. They're not in a cross-collaborative kind of generative conversation. So therefore, we don't know, if I'm the CEO, I don't know if the board is doing something on succession planning. So the board is responsible for CEO succession planning. My thought is, why not start 5 years out? Start the conversation in the boardroom. 5 years from now, what kind of CEO would we need? Then 4 years, 3 years. So there's different activities that the board can do. The 5 year, 4 year, 3 years out, Doug, they're very strategically thinking and being guided by maybe a consultant on how to strategically think about it. And they should inform the board. When the board is looking at CEO competencies from 3, 4, 5 years out, that helps the CEO develop the internal candidates. So the internal candidates understand what the board's looking for. So when there's not that conversation, it is a big breakdown and it does impact retention of good candidates, internal candidates, I should say. So there's that whole piece that needs to happen in advance. So the CEO knows how to build people and then an open dialogue. So 2 years out, the board should have an update on the internal candidates so they know how the internal candidates are being developed. So there's a readiness report that is great for them to see every quarter. When you get closer to a year and a year end, that's a monthly conversation. But what I'm also saying is a year before the CEO is retiring, the board should pull the trigger and do an external search if they're not going to go internal. They should know that. So this piece here, Doug, is I think there's some awesome internal candidates. And we're willing to certify them. We've done that with clients. We work with them starting 2 years out, about a year, and we go, you've got people. You don't have to do an external search. So then we can continue to develop the internals. However, at that 1 year mark, boards may still go, okay, we got good people. Let's make it more competitive and do an external search. I think the board needs to know if they've got ready now candidates.
That is really interesting. So let's go deeper into there. So the idea is that I assume you're engaging a consultant to help dig into the psychological qualifications and skill qualifications of your internal candidates to see if they have a strong aptitude for the CEO role. So talk to me about how that works. I think you said you want to do that at least 2 years out. And then that would give you the data to determine how strongly you need to lean inside versus outside, right? Can you tell me how that works?
Absolutely. And 2 years is a minimum that I hope to start on that. I have a client who's done it 8 years in advance, and now we're 3 years out. So the pace is quickening. What we've developed is a rubric, like a 20-page booklet that we use as a guide conversation. I'm just sharing this as a way of thinking. So we start with that strategic overview. What's the strategic context of the CEO role in the future, that 2 year mark? How do we see our credit union 2 years out? How are we looking at the industry? What is our strategic trajectory? So we create a common language, Doug, about how to talk about that CEO role in the future, which is really cool because it gets us in that strategic format. Then we also look at what's the governance framework. Once you have a new CEO, is the board going to lean in more, put their fingers in more to the organization? Or are they going to still lean out and be strategic? So if they're going to do an external search, external candidates are going to want to know, what's the governance framework when I come in? So that's another conversation. So we look at that. We also look at, we do a 360 for the CEO. What are the internal populations going to say about the next CEO? What do they think is needed? What are they saying about what kind of leadership is needed? And then externally as well. So that's a good piece of work. Then we go into soft skills like you talked about, go into emotional intelligence that's required, values, drivers, motivating factors. So there's a whole way you can assess all that. The last thing, one of the last things we look at, Doug, is what's going to be on the ideal resume. Because once you've set the leadership context there, you've looked at what are the competency and characteristics that are needed to interweave to be able to pivot the organization. And I'm going to give homage here to Ram Charan. That's his piece of work that I've borrowed from. He's awesome in that. It's like, we've got to move away from the linear checklist of what we want in a CEO. We need to look at competencies and characteristics that interweave and interface in certain kind of situations. So then we get to the resume. Like, one of the biggest conversations there, Doug, is, wow, what kind of degree do we need? Do we need a degree? Do we need a master's? So that's a huge conversation, especially in the context of DEIB these days. So there's a whole school of thought on if we go and say we have to have a degree, what does that do for us limiting our population of qualified candidates and access to education for all populations? So there's that piece. Do we want somebody that's cross-functional in leadership, like we've talked about, or come up through a certain functional domain of expertise? And then lastly, our favorite part is values. What are the values that we want the CEO to embody day one so they can make all this great stuff happen?
That is awesome. So you're really clearly defining the end point as far as the skills and the target for the role as it's going to stand when the transition happens. And then you're pulling it back into what do we want to see on the person's resume in order to make them ready for the place that we're going to be when the transition happens. That's what I heard you say. So then the next question is, do you give a evaluation of the internal candidate's ability to get there?
Absolutely. Absolutely. We take this document and this conversation that the board's agreed on. This is how we all want to look, and they've aligned. And that's a lot of work, which is great. We want alignment. So then we actually go and look at the internal candidate and see how they line up with the strategic context piece, how they add that value. Do that have the education? We do the assessments. We interview quite a bit. So yeah, we'll write up a CEO readiness report. And then the neat thing about it, Doug, is if we start early as a board, the end of the report will say, here's where you line up really well, candidate. And these are the two things that you need to focus on in the next 2 years. So they got a place to go.
Have you been in situations where the information you give to the board is that you might need to look external? When does that happen? When is it that there's a closable gap between the skills that this person needs to have and the options that your C-suite currently provides?
Absolutely. Well, in our CEO readiness report, right up front, we'll do an executive summary report for the board and say, hey, board. And we do a verbal report out too, because we want to have that conversation. We'll say, here's where your candidates line up. And this is the risk that you have if you put this person in the role. And if you put this person in the role, you have to be comfortable and manage to that risk and not just let that person go on their own. We're really clearly upfront stating, here's where it works and here's where the risk is.
I assume that you would use a variety of testing to get the psychology of the candidates, both internal and external, so you'd have the same comparisons. Is that true?
Absolutely. We do the same testing internally and externally. We have to. So absolutely. We have a number of instruments we use. Some are they're just work so well and they're easy to understand. And we draw from 2 or 3 different organizations that put out testing, Doug, and to see if are they saying the same thing. So if they're all saying the same thing, there's a high validity index here.
Right. Yeah. We do the same thing. We hire for our employees. We use some of these tests, and you can tell with the consistency of the answers whether or not they're doing a great job thinking about the answer or just giving the answer.
Yeah, we get flags. We get red flags, or we get inconsistency index scores, things like that help us. And we'll share that with the candidate. So before we present a candidate, we go through their assessments with them and say, here's what they're saying. What do you think? So we do a feedback session as well. And I think it's important to note that all of our principal recruiters are also certified in all these instruments. We don't need to use external consultants. So we're all certified. That's part of our foundation here. It's important for us that the candidate validate the assessment reports before they're used in a presentation of how they're ready.
Is there data that you've seen about the effectiveness? Of course, effectiveness can be measured a variety of different ways, but I'm just wondering if there's any data about internal versus external candidates and the only word I can think of is effectiveness of the organization going forward in either one of those scenarios. Is there any data that you've seen on that?
Yeah, we have tons of data, Doug, tons. So let's go with internals first. So there's internals where there's been a lot of development, a lot of personal and professional development of people. These candidates score on the same level with the external candidates. Then there's internal candidates in an organization where there's not been that development. They score below average. So we do have a threshold of where we think we need to be on emotional intelligence and personal mastery that we use as a baseline. External candidates that have been in organizations that have developed people will score higher on these assessments. So that's one piece of information. Yes, we had that data. And then what we also want to look at, Doug, is go back to how's this person really added value? So I can have a high emotional intelligence quotient, yet maybe I don't add value because I'm in a certain place in my life. I just want to do my job and go on. So we don't want to just take the test scores. We can't hire just on that. It's a piece of information. Then we want to go back and see what's on the resume, but even more, be in several interviews with the candidates to keep peeling back that layer, what they've done, and how does it impact, and what mistakes have they learned from. So that's another whole piece of the process.
Interesting. So would I be correct to infer that if the board has been relatively passive, I know that's fuzzy as heck, but about succession planning and development, and something comes up, right? A healthcare situation comes up, and suddenly your CEO is going to leave within a relatively short period of time, then the preparation isn't there. The planning, the years of preparing for the leadership role is not there. Generally, then an external candidate is going to be more successful in that situation.
Nice summary. Yep, absolutely. Absolutely. So what we've developed is that might put a context here is there's 5 levels or types of conversations in a boardroom. So the way you just described that passive board are levels 1 and 2. We're fiduciary sound, board, and we do oversight. What we're looking for is more boards to go to the higher levels as well and be strategic thinkers and sense makers, futuristic thinking. Those are levels 4 and 5. The levels 1 and 2, they're going to go about the search a bit differently than the boards that are used to be in those higher level conversations, Doug. It's our job as consultants to help the boards who are really good at fiduciary and oversight. All 5 levels of conversation are needed. I'm not putting emphasis on one or the other, all needed. But it's our job as consultants to help those fiduciary and strong oversight boards to start to look differently at the CEO role, start to think of themselves as board members, as leaders, not just overseers.
Awesome content, Deedee. Thank you so much. As we wrap things up here, any final comments for our listeners, for the leaders of the credit union movement about board readiness and the process of getting ready to be a credit union leader?
The sooner we start the conversation, Doug, the more options we have as we go through this journey and learning together. So start early. Even though you don't think you need a CEO for several years, it's really great to have a 3-hour session, maybe every year or every other year. Like, what is the board's role in CEO succession? Start early. And I just love to continue the conversation. Every year it gets richer and richer in the boardroom. So I really appreciate the time today. Thank you.
Thanks, Deedee.
That's all the insider credit union knowledge we have for this episode. Are you enjoying the conversation? Be sure to subscribe and share your thoughts with other credit union leaders by leaving us a review. See you next time on See You on the Show.
The opinions voiced in this material are for general information only and are not intended to provide specific advice or recommendations for any individual security. To determine which investments may be appropriate for you, consult your financial advisor prior to investing. Economic forecasts set forth may not develop as predicted. All performance referenced is historical and is no guarantee of future results. Indexes are unmanaged and cannot be invested into directly.